Hello everybody. Well, if this isn't a bit of a blast from the recent past, cast your mind back 5 years ago, and I appreciate in some ways that seems like forever ago, and in other ways only yesterday, and it felt like the internet was awash with BMW M135i's, 140s, 235s, 240s, later the M2, M2 comp, so on and so forth. You couldn't go 5 minutes without seeing a video from somebody on one. I did loads of them, and that's to say nothing of the likes of Joe Achilles, who did an awful lot of coverage, usually involving something to do with Motec, if you're watching Hello Joe. And there's a lot of good reasons why people like him and me were really excited about these cars. And one of them was the fact that they were an awful lot of car for not a lot of money. They were being practically given away on dirt cheap finance deals. But that now is a distant memory. So in the cold light of 2024, is a BMW M240i still a car that deserves your hard-earned cash? Let's find out. So very much has changed in the automotive landscape over the last decade, and companies like BMW seem almost unrecognizable now. Believe it or not, there was a tiny bit of controversy over the 2 Series when it was launched, because like the 4 Series, up until that point, it hadn't existed. Now, in fairness, there were lots and lots of people who already didn't like the 1 Series, and in a lot of ways the 2 Series did get a little bit of an easier time, because where the 1 in the eyes of most was a hatchback, the 2 was generally a coupe. There were a few different variants as time went on, but I think to most people you say 2 Series and this is what they think of. The 2 Series also brought with it a few models that had the eye of the enthusiast, particularly the M235i. Remember, at launch in 2014 there was no M2, but there was an M235i. And here you had a car that to many people appeared to be the second coming of the old E46 M3. Yes, it was still turbocharged with the now single turbo twin scroll N55 engine, 3 litres, straight 6, a classic BMW formula, and driving only the rear wheels, unless you bought the X-Drive, which we never got. It also made very similar numbers to the old E46, 320-ish horsepower, so a little bit less power, and 330-odd pounds-feet of torque. That's 450 newton meters. In other words, quite a bit more than the E46. 3-point turn hill start torque to test. Passed with flying colours. Visibility, very good, B-pillars far back, automatic 8-speed ZF gearbox, a delight, proper gear lever, hill hold works, all the controls nice, light and easy. This is a very natural car. After 5 seconds back in it, I was very much at home. The M235i was also not a particularly heavy car, not a particularly big car, and by being turbocharged, it also appealed to a new crowd of BMW fans, those that loved tuning. You see, historically, even with the likes of the M3, because they were naturally aspirated, trying to get more power out of them was never going to be a particularly easy task. Now the things had turbos on, it was going to be far, far simpler. The M235 and its counterpart, the M135i, very quickly became the go-to car for anybody that didn't fancy themselves a Golf R. And like the VW, part of the reason behind this was the fact they were available on some extraordinarily tempting finance deals. In fact, I recall at several points over these years being offered cars not unlike this for something like £300 to £500 down and £300 to £400 a month. You don't really get much of anything for that these days, and you certainly wouldn't get something like this. For 2016, the M235 then morphed into the M240i, with the old N55 engine being replaced by the new generation B58, which though on paper made only marginally more power, 13 horses, it made a fair bit more torque, now 369 pounds-feet, that's 500 newton meters, but those numbers only ever told half the story. The B58 is a mighty, mighty thing, and it turned what was an already quick car into a savagely fast one. The story also goes, this engine had a bit of helping hand and guidance from Toyota, who at the time were working with BMW on what was to become the new Supra. And they wanted to make sure that not only was it a good engine, it would meet Toyota's very exacting standards. And although the old one already had a reputation as being a bit of a tuner's favourite, this one took it to a different level. And today there are some out there that see this almost as the second coming of the 2JZ. In fact, as it pulled away earlier when I was doing my drive-bys, I could have sworn I heard just a hint, just a suggestion, the merest whiff of the ghost of a 2JZ in this car's exhaust note. And because of its wonderful price-performance ratio, this car did unfortunately also attract more than a few ne'er-do-wells. And for that reason, if you want to buy yourself one today, you best use a CarVertical check, which in just 60 seconds will tell you if the car has been involved in a big smash, written off, used as a taxi, unlikely as that might be, or more likely involved in either a fire or theft. CarVertical works on either their website or through a mobile app on either Android or Apple. For 20% off, don't forget to use my discount code JAYEMM. Curiously, 2016 also saw the arrival of the M2 proper, the first time BMW had committed to calling one of their small cars a full fat M. Before this, we'd had only the 1 Series M Coupe, and nobody was ever quite sure whether that really was or wasn't an M car. But with the M2, there was no doubt. However, like the 1 Series M Coupe, the one piece of the puzzle that was missing was a proper M engine. It instead made do with an admittedly tuned version of the N55 you'd seen in the old M235i. And so there were many who felt that really this was all the car you needed. And sat here, right now, I can see why they would say that, because it's not slow. Fortuitously, just a few days ago, I actually drove for the first time in years an E46 M3. And this is definitely quicker. More than that, though it does share their car's needlessly firm ride at low speeds, both of them having a passive damper setup, when you get on it, this is the far better behaved car. I think the steering is certainly better. It's got a little bit more weighting to it. It feels a little bit more composed. I've got a lot more confidence in the chassis, but you do need to exercise caution because this was common for both the 2 Series and the 1 Series M lights. It is a little bit under-tired. That old E46 at the back, you'd find 255 section tyres. This, just 245. And that's for a car with another 100 pounds-feet of torque before it was remapped. I don't actually know what power this car is making, and its owner, Simon, tells me he doesn't know. Claims have been made, but it's never been dynoed, so we're not entirely sure. But you could quite happily get one of these to, well, near enough 400 horsepower, if not a bit more. Torque also could be increased, and the thing was hardly lacking to begin with. Mercifully, this car has also had a limited slip differential fitted, because even in standard guise, when it was wet, these things were a real handful. Even in the dry, they sometimes struggled. I remember driving more than a few 140i's in the winter, and yeah, it was entertaining, to say the least. Mad little things those, but very, very characterful. There was even a choice of 2 very good gearboxes with this. You could go with the 6-speed manual, the purest option, but honestly one that not many people did. Instead, most went for this, the 8-speed ZF automatic. And I can see why. It's a very, very good box. I think it's fair to say that over time maybe it's become a little less impressive, but the fact is, it is still what I would class as an excellent gearbox. It does exactly what you tell it, when you tell it, the shifts are smooth enough, but still quick. It suits this kind of car. and my life, you can carry some serious speed. You don't have to rev the thing out, but if you want to, you can. And one of the few criticisms that was levelled at this engine was that compared to its predecessor, it didn't have quite the same appetite for revs. The design here, though displacing essentially the same capacity as its predecessor, did so through slightly different dimensions, this being a more undersquare engine. Partly, I think, why it does make a little bit more low down power and why it could so easily overpower that rear axle, but also why it just didn't have quite the appetite for revs. I say that though, and then you put your foot down and yeah, this one does. That might be the map. It's daft quick, this thing. It's really, really quick. Now, this one, I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear, has had a few subtle modifications made, but Simon, being a slightly older gent, didn't want anything too silly and leery. This is one of the reasons that he Part X'd his Fiesta ST for it. The ST is a fabulous car, there's really nothing inherently wrong with it, but he wanted something a tad more grown up, a little bit different. He's tempted to get an Aston Martin next, but the fact is, for this sort of money, in fact, a lot more than this money, he's not going to get an Aston anywhere near as quick or livable as this. I mean, you've got plenty of space in here, there's a good amount of room in the back seats, not massive, but enough. The boots are very good size too. The car itself, though, isn't overly massive. You can place it nicely and easily, and it's a very, very natural thing to drive. This is an excellent package. Really, truly excellent. But one, of course, that people felt they could improve upon. So what's he done? The aforementioned map. There's also an uprated air filter, potentially a K&M, but he didn't say. Some sports cats that are a good brand, and a very subtle Motec stance setup. So it's sat on marginally lower eye-back springs. He has also had the geometry done by an old school chap with a piece of string, and he said that did make a big difference. Out of the factory gates, BMW don't tend to really ever give you much in the way of adjustment, but it is important to get what little they do give you right, and the car feels pretty decent. The suspension does struggle a little bit. If I had my journo hat on, which I really should on account of the fact this is a review, it's just not quite as compliant as I would like, but genuinely I trust this so much more than that E46. That was needlessly bouncy. This is better damped. Not perfect, not brilliant, but certainly better. I also like the fact that for the exhaust he's fitted the sports cats but left everything else alone, meaning when you're on it you get a nice little bit of noise from it, but it's not raucous, it's not intrusive, it's not silly. The larger carbon paddles here for the shift are also a nice touch, although to be honest I think they're actually not entirely necessary because they're fixed to the wheel, so you're always going to kind of be able to get to them. When you fix something like that to the column, having bigger paddles is more important. To the wheel, less so, but they do look good. The colour combo and interior also you could criticise for being a little bland. The screen up here now looks laughably small through the lens of 2024, but it has had Android Auto and Apple CarPlay retrofitted, which all works fine and good, although it has made the BMW screen lower resolution, but then maybe I've done something wrong because I was just mucking about with it unguided earlier. The stereo, the Harman Kardon, he wasn't a fan of because Harman Kardon in cheaper BMWs is always trash, so he's uprated that. There's an Audison sub you may have spotted in the boot. It is on sections like this where I start to get a little bit frustrated with the car because it's doing that all the time. And if I had to live with it, that might get a bit tiresome. Or it might not. Being fair to the thing, this was one of the most affordable models in the BMW performance car lineup, and so compromises were always going to be made, and the suspension is one of them. In recent years, actually, I would say they've got quite a bit better, and I really want to try the new M2. That apparently is very, very sorted in that department. One thing that has to be said though, I take my hat off to BMW because with this, the first two series, they absolutely nailed the customer retention game. Not only did they have those ever-tempting finance deals, but they also timed the model releases perfectly. So the original, the M240i, launched in 2014, then this came out in 2016 along with the original M2, and at that point, most people, when their finance deal came to an end, they upgraded to the 240. But then 2 years later, the M2 competition landed, and the significance of that was it had a proper M engine, the S55 instead of the N55. And at that point, the people that had a 235 and a 240 were then told that for only a small token amount more each month, they could get themselves into a proper M car. And they did. And M2 competitions were everywhere. And then the world melted, and we all sort of forgot about these. Well, I did anyway. That was until Simon emailed me and said, do I want to drive one? And I thought, crikey, actually, I don't think I've done one since the pandemic. So, yeah, absolutely. And though, sure, it's a flawed car, chiefly in terms of the dynamics, overall, the good far outweighs the bad. And I'm really quite happy about that, because I wasn't looking forward to slating another BMW, having just given the E46 M3 another good kicking. But this is good. It's not an M2, so you're always going to be a little easier on it. And the finance deals have gone, but these are still a bargain. I was looking today, and an M235i, if you're willing to be a bit brave, they start at around sort of 12 to 13,000 pounds. These, though, barely any more. 15 to 16 grand will get you into this, a proper performance BMW. 6 cylinders of Bavarian goodness. My only real criticism being the fact that for this generation of 2 Series, there wasn't really much available in the way of customization, which is why so many of them got wrapped and then modified. It's a shame, really. There were only ever a few colours available from the factory and so on and so forth. To then get yourself into an M2, you've got to spend, realistically, about £25,000. And if you want a competition, closer to 30, which means these are still rather tempting. This is my most demanding section of road. How does it fare? Ooh, that back end tried to step out there. I've got it in Sport, not the Sport Plus, which loosens off the traction control, because I'm not mad. Oh yeah, crikey. That tail is lively. Very lively. Yeah, bigger rear tyres and a slightly better suspension. That's what this car needs. Do that, and you'll have yourself, for probably less than £20,000, something pretty much perfect. So, I want to say a big thank you to Simon for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.